Let's begin with something simple but powerful. Most people are waiting to feel motivated. They are waiting for the right mood, the right energy, the right inspiration. They say, when I feel better, I'll start. But let me tell you something you already know deep down. If you only act when you feel inspired, you will spend most of your life standing still. Feelings are unpredictable. Some mornings you wake up strong. Some mornings you wake up tired. Some days you feel confident. Some days you doubt yourself. If your actions are tied to your emotions, then your progress will rise and fall like the weather. And you cannot build a great life on unstable conditions. Success is not built on emotion. It is built on structure. You don't need more motivation. You need fewer options. The reason you hesitate isn't because you lack desire. It's because you've given yourself too many escape routes. Maybe later, maybe tomorrow, maybe when things calm down. Those small phrases quietly rob you of your future. The powerful person does something different. They decide in advance. They don't wake up and ask, "Do I feel like working out today?" They say, "This is the time I train." They don't ask, "Do I feel like working on my goals?" They say, "This is the hour I build my future." That's discipline. Discipline is simply a decision made once, instead of a decision made every day. When you decide once, you remove the debate. And debate is where dreams go to die. Every time you argue with yourself, you weaken your authority over your own life. You start negotiating with comfort, and comfort is very persuasive. Comfort says you deserve a break. Comfort says it's not urgent. Comfort says you can always start next week. But discipline says start anyway. Now understand this clearly. Discipline is not punishment. It is not harshness. It is self-respect in action. It is saying, my future matters more than my mood. You don't build discipline by making giant promises. You build it by keeping small ones. If you say you will wake up at 6:00, wake up at 6:00. If you say you will read 10 pages, read 10 pages. If you say you will work for one focused hour, work for one focused hour. And when you keep that promise, something powerful happens. You begin to trust yourself. Self-trust is more valuable than motivation. Motivation fades, self-trust compounds. Every time you follow through, you cast a vote for the person you are becoming. And when you break your word to yourself repeatedly, you cast a vote for weakness. That's not criticism, that's awareness, and awareness gives you power. Here is something else to consider. The pain of discipline is light. It feels heavy in the moment, but it is light. The alarm clock rings, that's a light pain. Sitting down to work when you'd rather scroll, that's a light pain. Saying no to distractions, that's a light pain. But regret is heavy. Regret is looking back 5 years from now and realizing you were capable of more. Regret is knowing you had the talent, the opportunity, the time, and you chose comfort instead. Discipline weighs ounces. Regret weighs tons. So how do you begin building this structure? You create non-negotiables. A non-negotiable is something you do whether you feel like it or not. It becomes part of your identity, not dramatic, not emotional, just consistent. You don't skip brushing your teeth because you're not motivated. You don't skip going to work because your mood is low. You do it because it's standard. That's what your goals must become, standard. And in the beginning, it will feel forced. That's normal. Growth always feels unnatural at first. You are stepping outside of patterns that have been comfortable for years. But understand this, the feeling of resistance is not a signal to stop. It is a signal that you are stretching. The more you act despite your mood, the less control your mood has over you. Eventually, discipline becomes easier than procrastination. Showing up becomes automatic, and something remarkable happens. You start feeling motivated because you are already in motion. Action creates clarity. Action creates energy. Action creates confidence. But action does not begin with inspiration. It begins with a decision. So stop waiting to feel powerful. Act, and the power will follow. Stop waiting to feel ready. Move, and readiness will catch up. You don't force yourself by shouting affirmations in the mirror. You force yourself by honoring your schedule, and once you master that, once you learn to act regardless of how you feel, you unlock control over your life. Because the moment you stop negotiating with your excuses, you start negotiating with your potential. Start anyway. Now, once you understand that discipline matters more than motivation, the next challenge becomes clear. Even when you decide to act, sometimes the task feels too big, it feels heavy, it feels overwhelming. And when something feels overwhelming, the mind looks for escape. Most people don't avoid action because they are lazy. They avoid action because the mountain looks too high. They look at the entire journey instead of the first step. They focus on the 50 pounds they want to lose instead of the walk they can take today. They think about writing a whole book instead of one page. They think about building a successful business instead of making one phone call. And because the vision feels so large, they freeze. Let me give you something simple but life-changing. Make the action smaller than your excuse. If your excuse says, "I don't have 2 hours," then don't give it 2 hours. Give it 10 minutes. If your excuse says, "I don't have the energy for a full workout," then don't do a full workout. Do 5 push-ups, do 10 squats, just begin, because the real obstacle is not the size of the task, it is the resistance to starting. Starting is the hardest part of anything. Once you begin, momentum begins to work in your favor, but until you begin, your mind magnifies the effort. It turns small tasks into giant burdens. You don't need intensity in the beginning, you need initiation. A man says, "I want to read more." Good, then read 1 page. 1 page turns into 2, 2 turns into 5. But if you tell yourself you must read 30 pages every night, you create pressure, and pressure creates avoidance. We often sabotage ourselves with ambition that is too heavy for today. Ambition is powerful, but it must be paired with practicality. You must respect the process. A tree does not grow in a week. Muscles do not grow in a day. Confidence does not grow in a moment. It grows through repetition, small, consistent repetition. If you want to force yourself to take action, lower the barrier so much that your mind has no room to argue. Tell yourself, "I will work for 5 minutes. That's all. Anyone can endure 5 minutes, and here is the secret. Once you start, you will often continue." 5 minutes becomes 15, 15 becomes 30, but even if you stop at 5, you have kept the habit alive. And keeping the habit alive is more important than performing at your best. Never underestimate the power of small progress. Small progress builds evidence. Evidence builds belief, and belief fuels larger action. Let's say you want to become healthier. Instead of changing your entire diet overnight, start by changing 1 meal. Instead of eliminating everything, add 1 healthy choice. Small victories build confidence. Confidence builds consistency, and consistency builds transformation. The reason many people quit is because they try to leap instead of step. They say, "Starting tomorrow, I will wake up at 5 a.m., exercise for an hour, read 20 pages, and build my side business." That lasts 3 days. Why? Because it is not sustainable. It is emotional. Emotion creates big promises. Wisdom creates small commitments, and small commitments kept daily will outperform big promises broken weekly. Understand something important. Momentum is more powerful than motivation. When you are in motion, you feel different. You think differently. You carry yourself differently. But motion begins with something almost embarrassingly small. Make the task so small that it feels almost too easy. That's the point, because what you are really building is not the result. You are building the identity of someone who shows up. Every time you begin, no matter how small, you send a signal to yourself, I am a person who acts. That identity grows stronger with each repetition, and once that identity strengthens, taking larger action becomes natural. You see, success is not one dramatic leap. It is a series of small, disciplined steps taken consistently over time. It is the quiet decision to do a little more than yesterday. It is the refusal to let zero become acceptable. Never let zero become acceptable. If you can't do the full routine, do part of it. If you can't run a mile, walk around the block. If you can't write a chapter, write a paragraph. Something is always better than nothing. Something builds momentum. Nothing builds guilt, and guilt drains energy. Progress creates energy. So the next time you feel overwhelmed, don't ask, how do I finish this? Ask, what is the smallest step I can take right now? Reduce the mountain to a stone. Pick up the stone. And tomorrow, pick up another. In time, you will look back and realize that what once seemed impossible was conquered through simple, consistent action. Start small, but start now. Now let's go a little deeper, because discipline helps you act, and small steps help you begin, but neither of those will last unless something more powerful shifts inside you. Your identity. Most people try to change their behavior without changing the way they see themselves. And that is why their effort feels temporary. They say, I'm trying to work out. They say, I'm trying to be productive. They say, I'm trying to build a business. But the word trying reveals something important. They still see themselves as someone who doesn't naturally do those things. You will always act in harmony with the story you believe about yourself. If deep down you believe you are inconsistent, you will find evidence to support that belief. If you believe you are not disciplined, your actions will align with that belief, not because you lack ability, but because identity drives behavior. You don't get what you want, you get what you are. That may sound uncomfortable, but it is incredibly empowering. Because if your life reflects who you are, then by improving who you are becoming, you change what you attract. Let me ask you something. When someone identifies as a smoker, how do they behave? They smoke. When someone identifies as an athlete, how do they behave? They train. The identity leads the action. So instead of forcing yourself to do the habits, begin by deciding who you are becoming. Don't say, I'm trying to wake up early. Say, I am becoming someone who owns the morning. Don't say, I'm trying to save money. Say, I am becoming financially disciplined. Don't say, I'm trying to get in shape. Say, I am becoming a strong and healthy person. Notice the difference. One is effort, the other is identity. When your identity shifts, your standards shift. And when your standards shift, your behavior follows naturally. A person who sees themselves as disciplined does not debate whether to show up. They show up because that's who they are. A person who sees themselves as reliable does not constantly break promises. Their word matters to them. Now here is the key. Identity is not built by affirmation alone. It is built by evidence. Every time you act in alignment with the person you want to become, you cast a vote for that identity. You wake up when you said you would, that's a vote. You choose the healthy option, that's a vote. You finish what you started. That's a vote. One vote doesn't change the election, but thousands of votes over time create a landslide. And here is the beautiful part. You don't need to feel like that person yet. You simply need to act like them long enough for it to become natural. In the beginning, it may feel like you are pretending. That's fine. Growth always feels unnatural before it feels normal. But repetition turns effort into instinct. If you repeatedly act with discipline, you eventually stop thinking of yourself as undisciplined. If you consistently follow through, you stop seeing yourself as inconsistent. Identity reshapes itself around your repeated actions. This is why small steps matter so much. Each small action is not just progress toward a goal, it is proof of who you are becoming. And when your identity becomes stronger than your excuses lose their power. You see, forcing yourself to take action becomes much easier when the action aligns with your self-image. If you see yourself as someone who avoids challenges, you will avoid them. But if you see yourself as someone who grows through challenges, you will step forward even when it's uncomfortable. So ask yourself a better question, not what do I want to achieve, but who do I need to become? Do you need to become more disciplined, more courageous, more focused, more patient? The goal is the destination. The identity is the vehicle. Too many people chase results without upgrading their character, but results without character are temporary. Character sustains success, and here is something powerful to remember. You don't need to become perfect. You need to become slightly better than yesterday. Identity evolves gradually. It strengthens with consistency. If you fall short one day, do not say, "This is who I am." Say, "This is what happened." There is a difference. Behavior can change. Identity can evolve, but only if you refuse to label yourself by your worst moments. Choose your identity carefully, speak it carefully, reinforce it daily with action, because the person you believe you are will determine the life you build. Become the kind of person who takes action, and action will no longer need to be forced. Now let me bring you to something that most people avoid thinking about, but it may be the most powerful driver of action you will ever discover. We've talked about discipline, we've talked about starting small, we've talked about identity, but sometimes even when you understand all of that, you still hesitate. You still delay. You still tell yourself, "I'll get serious later." Why? Because the cost of staying the same doesn't feel urgent enough. Human beings are wired to avoid pain, but here's the truth: if the pain of change feels greater than the pain of staying where you are, you will stay where you are. Every single time. So if you want to force yourself to take action, you must raise the cost of inaction. You must make staying the same more painful than moving forward. Ask yourself an honest question. If you continue on your current path for the next 5 years, not improving, not growing, just maintaining, where will you be? What will your health look like? What will your finances look like? What will your confidence look like? What will your relationships look like? Most people never sit quietly long enough to confront that picture. They distract themselves. They tell themselves everything will work out. But hope without action is not a strategy. If you keep doing what you're doing, you will keep getting what you're getting. That's not negativity. That's mathematics. And when you truly allow yourself to imagine the long-term consequences of inaction, something shifts inside you. You begin to realize that procrastination is not harmless. It is expensive. Comfort has a price tag. It costs you opportunity. It costs you growth. It costs you self-respect. Every day you delay something you know you should do, you quietly weaken your own confidence. Not because the task is undone, but because you know you avoided it. Now let's flip the perspective. What happens if you do act? What happens if you commit to growth? Yes, it will be uncomfortable. Yes, it will require effort. Yes, you may stumble, but the discomfort of growth is temporary. The discomfort of regret can last a lifetime. Imagine yourself 10 years from now looking back at today. Will you thank yourself for the discipline? Or will you wish you had started sooner? That future version of you is watching, and here is something powerful. When the reason becomes strong enough, the action becomes easier. When you connect your daily habits to something bigger than convenience, you tap into a deeper force. Maybe it's your family, maybe it's your children, maybe it's the example you want to set, maybe it's the promise you made to yourself years ago. Tie your action to something meaningful, make it bigger than comfort. If you are only acting for temporary excitement, you will quit when it fades. But if you are acting because you refuse to let your potential go unused, because you refuse to disappoint your future self, Because you refuse to settle for average, that becomes powerful. Sometimes you must remind yourself what is at stake, not in a dramatic way, not in fear, but in clarity. If you neglect your health, the bill will come later. If you neglect your finances, the bill will come later. If you neglect your growth, the bill will come later. Life always collects payment. The question is whether you want to pay in discipline now or regret later. And here's something else. Raise the cost publicly if necessary. Tell someone your goal. Create accountability. When others know what you are working toward, your standard rises. Your word carries weight. You are less likely to quit quietly. You see, we often behave better when someone is watching. So build systems that make your inaction visible. Track your progress, set deadlines, remove the luxury of endless delay. Inaction thrives in vagueness. Action thrives in clarity. Be specific about what happens if you don't move. Be specific about what you lose. Because when the consequences are vague, the urgency disappears. But when the consequences are clear, the decision sharpens. Growth will always demand something from you: time, energy, focus, sacrifice. But staying the same also demands something, and often far more than you realize. So choose your cost wisely, because you will pay either way. And when you fully understand that doing nothing is not neutral, it is a decision with consequences, you stop treating action like an option. You start treating it like a responsibility. And once you see clearly what inaction is costing you, you won't need to be pushed. You will move because you refuse to stay the same.